Hello and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer, and right this second I am not joined by Sean McGuigan. He's watching horse racing with men I don't know and don't care for. So to help me talk about the winners and the losers from the third round of the SPFL Trust Trophy is a man who resembles a cross between Troye Sivan, Horace Bruin, and that weird-looking fella at the end of Alien Romulus. Yes, that man is called Fraser Clarke. Fraser, comment allez-vous?
Ça va bien. That's French? I don't actually know what it means. It just was the first French that came to my head.
Yeah, I think that means, I'm doing okay.
Good. That standard grade 2 in French is coming in strong.
Fantastic. But how are you, Fraser? How is everything since you and I last caught up with one another?
Hey, I'm very well, apart from the fact I wasted my weekend going to Peterhead to watch a Fringe Dumbarton side get beaten 1-0 in a terrible game of football. Apart from that, I'm very well. I'm almost off on holiday from work for the first time in about 2 or 3 months, so that's, it's given me a wee boost.
Well, at least you went to see your team, unlike some people on this podcast. But we'll get to that. We'll get to both my own personal hell and, in fact, our own personal hells, plural, because Fraser and I have sifted through all 14 games from the weekend. We've picked out the very best and the very worst of the action, 5 from column A, 5 from column B, and over the next hour or so we are going to discuss it, and you're just going to have to sit there and take it like Alex DeLarge, strapped to the chair, getting drops in his eyes, screaming, pleading, begging, while Kelty Hearts 3, Elgin City 1 plays on an endless loop.
There's an idea for a podcast, actually. What team would you, if you could only watch one football team for the rest of your life, you're strapped to a chair like that, one team in Scottish football that you could just watch endlessly over and over again?
Oh, that's a good question. Weirdly, the first team that came to the top of my head there, the Partick Thistle team that won the First Division in 2012-2013. You know, the team with like Erskine Doyle and Stephen O'Donnell was playing for them. James Cragen scoring the goal at Greenock Morton to effectively win the title. I think they might, in terms of lower league football, might have been one of the most aesthetically pleasing sides. I'm perhaps loath to say it, but maybe Falkirk's team last season, they were very, very good. But I don't think I'd want to sit there and watch Falkirk just go unbeaten for 36 games. What about yourself? What would you choose?
The Kenny Shiels era Morton team.
Yes, I listened to the podcast that you and Fowler did, the Championship podcast. Yeah, I mean, you could have easily recorded double the length of time, and I still don't think it would be enough. It's incredible to think how many badly run football clubs there are in Scotland, particularly in that division. It must just be like the attempting to be a full-time team in Scottish football when you've got a small fan base, perhaps indifferent locals, changing fortunes, indifference. It must be very, very difficult.
It's a bit of a funny league because you've got, maybe in a typical championship, you'd have half the league think they're too big for the championship.
Yeah.
And half the league are probably too small for the championship and are maybe League One clubs who are kind of punching upwards a wee bit. This season's a wee bit different, but historically you've always maybe had that. And everyone's kind of stuck in this league that they basically don't quite fit in. And that podcast, to be honest, if I hadn't had to nip off after an hour and 45 minutes, which I thought would be ample time, then we probably could have gone on for another hour or so, just talking about Hamilton in particular.
Yes, Hamilton. Unfortunately, Hamilton weren't playing, otherwise we'd have plenty more to talk about them. But Fraser, before we look at the winners and losers, the Challenge Cup, what is a lower league fan, Dumbarton supporter, similar size, maybe slightly bigger than Stenhousemuir, but obviously two broadly same-sized teams. What does the Challenge Cup mean to you?
I don't think it means anything unless you get to the semi-finals of the final.
Yeah.
Like, you never want to see your team get beaten. And obviously I went up to Peterhead at the weekend, so obviously I cared about it in some degree to bother doing that. But if we'd lost at the weekend in a league game to Steny or Annan like we've got this weekend, that would have put me in a bad mood. Like, even if we'd played well and we'd lost, it would have put me in a bad mood. But we went up to Peterhead. It was a bang average game of football. We lost 1-0. I was like, it's a bit frustrating. Drove half an hour down the road and had basically forgotten about it. Flushed out the system.
I don't think, unlike there's teams in Scotland whose seasons are defined by what they do in like the League Cup or the Scottish Cup, but the Challenge Cup's just a bit of a bonus, and I have no doubt that every single player that wants to win, because ultimately that's why players get to this level, because they are inherently very competitive, and even the fringe players that compete for these sides, they ultimately want to force their way into the first team, and so by playing well in these competitions, that puts them into the manager's thoughts. But even so, I'm the same. It's the sort of competition that, if Stennismere do all right in it, great. If they don't, well, the league's a lot more important. And I was actually frustrated that Challenge Cup tie came up this weekend, given the fact that the Warriors had won their previous 2 games. You just want to keep that momentum going and carry on in the league, and having a fairly inconsequential cup tie sandwiched between them, I felt it was a wee bit disruptive.
A game as well, from Stenny's point of view, where it worked out perfectly, but it could quite easily have been like a 4-0 defeat.
Yeah.
And, you look at it on paper and you think Falkirk, oh man, like they're going to bring a big support. They're flying at the moment. Obviously, it's had the opposite effect, but that would have been a game that maybe it would just stump that momentum a wee bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's just Fraser and I just contextualising the Challenge Cup there. That was just really for our benefit. I don't care if what you think about the Challenge Cup. Well, I do, obviously. Please keep listening to this podcast. I'm being body. Just let's enjoy each other's company. Now, Fraser, we'll start with a winner, and we'll start with perhaps the most incredible comeback that we have seen so far in the competition this season. We're going to talk about Scott Brown's Ayr United. They were 2-0 down against Raith Rovers, but came back to win the match 3-2, and their sterling start to the competition continues.
Yeah, and this game just looked like a lot of fun. Like I was watching the score coming in, with Raith going 2-0 up quite early on, and then Ayr coming back. And it was one of those games where I just thought, quite looking forward to the highlights. Monday morning, treat myself to the highlights at that once I've got a few bits of work out the way. And you know with Raith TV that the highlights are going to be good quality, and these were exceptional.
These were exceptional. You're absolutely correct there. The only thing I would think that would take them onto like Sky Sports covering a Super Sunday game is if they had commentary. However, must have about 4 different cameras covering the game, and particularly the stuff that they've got going behind the goals. Alternative, you've got multiple angles behind the goals, and it just helps put those goals in a better context. You can see how the play develops and how these goals are formed, and it really adds a lot in the package at Raith Rovers. It must be, it must be I wouldn't say the best. It's certainly not far off.
Production values wise,
yes.
Definitely got to be. I remember East Fife, I don't know if they've still got it, but East Fife had like a really super slow-mo camera they used to have behind the goal that was filmed in a kind of similar angle to that. They played a game, was it against Albion Rovers about 5 years ago, that finished, I'm sure it was 5-4 or 4-3, just a ridiculous game of football. And they showed the highlights from behind the highlights from behind the goal in like super slow-mo where you could see all the bobbles of AstroTurf and everything like that coming off. Oh, it was great. Anyway, this game, highlights that do the game justice. And to be fair, certainly based on those highlights, I think 3-2 maybe flattered Raith a wee bit more than it flattered Ayr United, because not to take away from Raith getting into that lead, but they were given a bit of a helping hand by Ayr looking very, very dodgy for both goals.
I think that's perhaps it's a high risk, high reward for the way that Scott Brown wants to play football. You especially saw that with the second goal, where I think the ball is played out to Paddy Redding, and Lewis Gibson straight away is right on top of him, right on top of his touch. Redding keels over, and then there's Gibson away to play a nice ball into Easton. It's actually quite a good finish. Again, the highlights, the camera that they've got behind the goal, you actually appreciate how narrow an angle it is for Easton to finish. Nevertheless, good finish, but it all comes down from this very stylish, very stylised way of playing football that just broke down at that point.
And it looks like a team who are very, very high on confidence, because even going 2-0 down, and they needed a contentious penalty to get back in the game, but going 2-0 down, they didn't ever really look like a team who chucked it. They were like, right, we know we're going to get a goal here, and we know once we get one, we can maybe get a couple. So they looked, I don't know, from the highlights, they looked very confident. They were still creating chances. Kevin Dabrowski made a few really decent saves as well. I'm interested in it from Ayr as the sort of winning point of view, and Scott Brown saying winning's a habit and that sort of thing, which it definitely is. And they are building something, I think, quite exciting at Ayr United this season. But also
quite literally in some cases with that new stand. I think that when on that Patreon podcast that you and Fowler recorded, please subscribe to the Patreon because it's good to listen to. That just looks a fantastic place to play football. And the fact that you have the stand side camera facing that is just aesthetically very, very nice.
It's a lot nicer than when the stand is over on the terrace inside and faces what looks like a kind of conservatory or a garden room. It's a horrible looking extension thing. And I'm actually looking, so Peterhead, who obviously beat us, drew Ayr at Somerset Park in the next round. And I'm off that weekend. I went to uni in Ayr, so I'm like, I could maybe go a wee trip down because I've not been since the stand got done up. So I've got that kind of penciled in. But yeah, from an Ayr point of view, I think all very, very positive looking. And They created a lot of chances. They probably could have scored a few more if they'd been a wee bit more clinical. The goals they lost were very avoidable from their point of view. The first one, Harry Stone just sort of like parrying the ball right back into a dangerous area. It's not a great bit of goalkeeping. And then the second one, like we mentioned, with the building out from the back, breaking down. But I wonder as well, from an Ayr point of view, how much did they enjoy spoiling Neil Collins, the Boyhood Killie fan's big day?
Like, is he a Boyhood Kilmarnock fan?
He's a massive Kilmarnock fan. Said that his one regret in football, aside from not getting a Scotland cap, is not playing for Kilmarnock. He applied for the Killie manager's job a few seasons ago. Like, he's from Troon, I think, or Irvine. I think it's Troon. Massive Kilmarnock fan. I have no doubt that a solid couple of thousand of Ayr United fans knew that as well. So to see him go 2-0 up on his debut, you think it's all going well, and then just snatch it away from him like that, I think they would have loved that.
Well, that's what happens when Raith Rovers have taken the worst kick-off I think I've seen since Partick Thistle tried to calm things down in Dingwall in the playoff final, because it's horrendous. It must be between, it was Dowd's got the second goal, between Dowd's hitting the back of the net and George Oakley getting the third, the winning goal. It must have been about 30, 45 seconds between that time.
I actually went to skip in the highlights because I thought it would be the replays and the celebrations and things like that, and ended up missing the goal. So it must have came like literally from kickoff, and it does. Is it Josh Mullen who plays the pass inside? I think I watched them on Monday, and I think it was him who played the pass inside that just started a whole kind of world of problems for Raith. It's also pretty much a carbon copy of the second goal. So you've lost two near enough identical goals down the same side, with a big striker being given effectively a tap, and both are decent finishes. They get into good areas, but chances that you would expect players like Anton Dowds and George Oakley to take, and you've lost them both within a minute. I mean, it's like amateurish stuff. That's horrendous.
Yeah, I'm really keen to see how Ayr United progress and develop this season, having seen them in pre-season. In fact, well, certainly not in pre-season, in the League Cup group stages. Hugely impressed by them, and they just carried that into this season. And as for Raith Rovers, we're going to see them again on Friday night when they take on Dunfermline in the Championship. So that's very tasty. Dunfermline obviously not going very well at the moment. Did record a point against Ayr United actually. They finally got off the mark for that last weekend. So yes, very interesting, and we'll look forward to that. Now I'm going to give you another winner. This winner is Colin Hamilton, brackets, and to a lesser extent David Gold. This is the Arbroath interim management team who recorded their first win since taking charge of the club, a rousing 3-0 win over Montrose. And David Gold only gets half the credit because he wasn't even there. He was away at a wedding.
Teams always record good results when their manager or a member of their management team's at a wedding. It's like Greg McDonald.
I've got that down here. I've got that down here. Yeah, I've got big Greg McDonald vibes. Of course, famously was a Stirling Albion manager, missed his side beating Rangers in 2012 because he was attending his own wedding. And in that game as well, Fraser, I don't know if you remember, Gary Tom, the Stirling Albion centre-back, kung fu kicked Ian Black in the chest and only got a yellow card.
Yeah, signs of the agenda that was against Rangers on their journey through the leagues.
The third, I don't want to get drawn into the sort of the start of the banter years, but my goodness, that really was a weird time for Rangers. Remember, bookies taking bets that they go the entire season unbeaten, and they pitch up in Peterhead, and it's a last minute Andy Little equaliser. Remember Rory McAllister? They, actually, just on a complete sidetrack, those two Peterhead goals were absolutely incredible. You had one, I think Scott McLaughlin scored a volley from the edge of the area, and the other one, it's a Rory McAllister sort of takes a crossfield pass, goes to chop inside, sends him Wilson Kribari on his backside, and then comes inside and shoots. And that was one of Rory McAllister's 250 goals, which is just absolutely extraordinary. Brilliant career. But we're not here to talk about Rory McAllister. And Rory McAllister's someone who's approaching the end of his career, but Colin Hamilton and to a lesser extent David Gold, they're approaching the start of their managerial career. And they've got 2 draws in the league and a 3-0 win over Montrose. That's pretty good going so far for the pair of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's very solid, you would say, especially given they inherited what looked like an absolute shambles from Jim McIntyre. And I think that Arbroath have a decent squad. And I actually tipped them for the league at the start of the year, but I said I fancy Arbroath to win the league, but McIntyre won't be their manager. And although I think that might be a bit of a long shot now, you certainly would say if they can build on what Gold and Hamilton have done so far, you'd fancy them to get to the playoffs, you would imagine, especially if in January they can maybe add a wee bit to the squad. But this, to do it against Montrose, so to do it against a rival team and to turn in what I'm guessing is probably one of their most commanding performances in about a calendar year, maybe more than that, because how many games did McIntyre win? 3 or 4 games across his whole tenure, and I think it was December sort of time that he was appointed. So it just would lift the whole mood around the club. The only thing I would caveat it with is, am I wrong in being a wee bit concerned? Not concerned, don't actually really care about Montrose. Like, lose to Cove Rangers, then lose to Arbroath, don't score in either games. It's not looking great.
It certainly wasn't for the lack of creating chances, certainly, because Kane Hester has an absolutely phenomenal chance. He's unmarked about 10 yards from goal towards the back post. Seems to take an age to decide what he wants to do with it. And it's actually it's a good save from Aidan McAdams, but Hester should have scored from that. I think from the outlay that Montrose have spent on bringing him into the club from Elgin City, I think they might have expected a little bit more from him. And I suppose as well, I mean, to stick up for Montrose, if I'm going to, they rested a couple of players. You know, I think it was Ross Matthews started in goal ahead of Cammy Gill. Sean Dillon wasn't playing. You know, guys like Paul Watson, he wasn't involved. These are guys who would start most weeks for them. But I don't want to take anything away from Arbroath, because that's as you say, that's a really important win for them. And just something that's got a galvanising effect. And if I'm going by what I read on, certainly Take Pie and Ball, for instance, like, as now we are back where we belong, I feel, in the League One forum. You're looking at our Arbroath thread as perhaps the most active of all the threads in it. And there seems to be a quiet clamour, I think, for Golden Hamilton to get the job on a full-time basis. Obviously, 2 players have got really long associations with the club. I think, they've between them nearly 20 years, perhaps more than 20 years. David Gold just had his testimonial. Colin Hamilton's testimonial year is this year's. Yeah, so about 20 years between them. Don't know how many games that translates to. Guys who have got a real affinity towards the club. And I think that you've got to start somewhere in management. I think David Gold's been a coach for a long time. Colin Hamilton's a manager. I think, but outside of football, I think he runs his own car valeting business in Larbert. But so he does have some managerial experience to some degree. So I don't see, you know, when you think of the potential managers that could come in for Arbroath, you know, there's not that many names that quite excite you. But I think Hamilton and Gold, off the back of that performance, you think maybe there might be something to be said for them.
It's something that I'd written in our programme when I was writing it for the Arbroath game a couple of weeks ago, so I knew that I had it written down somewhere. Almost 700 appearances between them. And I think you're spot on with that thing. See, if there was a queue of managers and you thought, he'd be a good appointment, he'd be a decent appointment, that maybe got you a wee bit excited as an Arbroath fan, yeah, fair enough. You maybe say, right, this is not the time for them, we need somebody in. Have you seen anybody linked with that job that you've been like, ooh, like they can come in and be an absolute game changer and you can realistically see them taking it?
The only one that I think that, yeah, he'd actually be quite good for it is Darren Young. But then I'm thinking a lot of his success has been in League Two. I find that strange that you can have so much success at one part-time level, but you're not as good the next level up. So I don't know what to make of that. But no, to answer the question, no, I haven't really seen many names that would be keen. Ian Murray, I suppose, would be one if he was really keen to get back into football. I'm sure he's got aspirations managing at a full-time level, however. But Hamilton and Gold, certainly if they do want the job, if they have designs in it, that's been quite impressive so far.
Yeah, and a word as well for a player who caught my eye when we played them a couple of weeks ago was Ali Spalding. He signed from, he was a young player at Airdrie.
Yes.
And I think a few people had said, oh, well, there might be something there, but he's maybe a bit lightweight and things like that. He faded in our game, maybe 70, 75 minutes. He tired himself out a wee bit. But he reminded me of Finlay Gray when he first came to us.
Oh, that's big praise.
So, like, great engine on him. He kept popping up just to win the ball back. Then he's got a decent wee turn of pace. He's quite good on the ball, just maybe a bit rough, like a bit rough around the edges. Maybe the sort of player who you can tell, so he obviously came through the ranks at Airdrie. I don't know anything about him from before then, but you know when you get a player and they've maybe been at a Premiership club, they've been at Hearts, they've been at Hibs, someone like that, they're maybe just a wee bit more rounded as a player.
Yeah.
Whereas you get someone, and you'd have had it with Mikey Anderson when he came from Broomhill, just a wee bit rough around the edges. That's what Finlay Gray was like. And I looked at him and thought, this guy's been great for them. And then it got to maybe 70, 75 minutes, and I don't know if it was just he had almost overworked himself, they didn't have the options or whatever, he just disappeared out the game. I mean, he disappeared out the game, they disappeared out the game, but by all accounts he had a very good game in this one as well. And he's somebody I can see, if he can keep up this form, having a kind of interesting or exciting future. Like, I'm kind of interested to see where he goes when you get somebody who's came in from a youth team at another, smaller, and I know Airdrie are full-time, but another smaller club who's not came the traditional route, and you know nothing about him, and then you see him for the first time and you think, this guy might have a bit of a chance.
Nice. Well, good luck to Ali Spalding. And as well, a player who we should speak about as well is Liam Callaghan, who scored the third with a very, very well taken side-footed finish. And what I really liked about it was obviously a long association as a player with Montrose, the sort of the no celebration in front of the sport. Scored the goal, hands up slightly, and then jogged back to the centre circle.
The old Declan Rice.
Yes, of course, scored that fantastic goal for Arsenal against West Ham and chose not to celebrate. Remember, it was Cristiano Ronaldo scoring for Manchester United, and he made obviously it's Cristiano Ronaldo, but made the big thing, when you put your hands up and your head down, you make it a bigger thing. Do you remember when Henrik Larsson scored for Barcelona against Celtic in the Champions League? He scored and just ran back to the centre circle, just head down, ran back. He did not make a big deal about it. It was just like somebody just doing their job. Also, that's the way to do it. If you're playing against a club who you really like and you've got a real affinity with, that's what to do rather than just drawing attention to yourself. But we are talking about Cristiano Ronaldo here. A
man who, if anything, hates the limelight.
Yes,
he wouldn't want to be the centre of attention.
Will shun the limelight any opportunity he gets. And just one final thing on this game, the Arbroath commentator, he used the term beans and toast for post. That was very funny. He did it twice, actually. But it was Innes Murray, the winger, was in co-commentary. And they sounded like a stepfather and stepson who are being forced to spend time with one another.
I find that commentator, and I've been there, you've been there, it's a very difficult job. I find his patter quite tiresome.
Yes, and so did Innes Murray by the sound of things as well. We'll talk about sticking with losers. We'll bring it a little bit closer to home, Fraser, and we've touched on it already, but we'll talk about Dumbarton Football Club and your road trip to Balmoor to watch your side losing 1-0, courtesy of Max Barry's header in the second half. And I think if we mentioned about how the deputies, the second string, will use this competition as an opportunity to push themselves into the manager's thoughts, I think when you and I were talking, when we were setting this podcast up, it's fair to say that no one who started for Dumbarton really did that.
Yeah, I had, so we came up with our sort of winners and losers, and I had as my losers Dumbarton's fringe players. So Stevie Farrell made, off the top of my head, 8 or 9 changes. I mean, It was a complete second string team that he put out. Paddy O'Neill in goals, Aaron Linus came back in at left back, Greg Young started. It's just his second competitive start and coming up for a year now since he did his ACL. So a lot of players who hadn't had a lot of game time came in. And to be honest, they maybe showed why they haven't had a lot of game time. So Aaron Linus actually was fine. He was probably one of the better performers. But if you watch the highlights back, it's Robert Ward takes him on, beats him quite easily and gets a crossover for Max Barry to score the goal. Max Barry then is out jumping Greg Young at the far post. I think Young, his fitness levels looked a lot better. Like, he was able to get up and down the park quite well. And like I said, it's a second competitive game that he's played since late September last year after an ACL injury. But you can tell he's still not quite sharp. Like, just that awareness of, maybe, there's a player coming off my blind side, I'll just block the header, because Max Barry is not a big physical player. It's not like you had McAllister steaming in for a header behind you. In midfield, Ryan Blair and David Wilson, two, I was going to say Marmite figures with the Sun support. Just probably that's not even quite accurate. Just players who aren't particularly rated or liked by large elements.
Seems a bit lightweight, that midfield.
Yeah, and they just really kind of struggled to impose themselves on it. Ryan Blair got on the ball a lot, but wasted it a lot, and David Wilson just didn't really get in the ball a lot. He made decent runs into good areas, but then did nothing with it, or then wasn't found. Just, he again is coming back after a spell injured, but again, didn't really look particularly sharp. Neither of them, I don't imagine that either of them will be remotely close to forcing Sena Niang out the team when he comes. Well, he'll come back in, I would imagine, for this weekend at Annan. And Suns also today signed a centre half on loan, which means that Mikey Miller can then move into midfield if he's needed in there. So you've maybe got competition between Sena Niang, Mikey Miller, Ryan Blair, David Wilson, all sort of competing for one position. And you'd say that Wilson and Blair are going to be quite a wee bit down the pecking order in that regard. And then up front, it was, well, out wide, Tony Wallace started. He had an injury at the end of last season that he played through, and then I think it knocked his pre-season a wee bit, so he didn't get a full pre-season under his belt. just doesn't really look fit, doesn't look fully sharp. Is again, just his touches off, just the things that Tony Wallace is good at. Last season you could fire the ball at him and he could just hold it up in that channel like a kind of wide forward. The ball would stick.
Like a Lee McCulloch at Wigan.
Yeah, exactly. Just this big lad. He doesn't really look like he should be a forward player, but there he is in the wing. But you could fire it up to him and it would stick and he would keep possession, and that wasn't really happening for him. And Joel Mbongo started his first game. He picked up a booking, which if you watch the highlights, you'll have thoroughly enjoyed the big Rami.
Oh, yeah. That was really good. That's one thing I've got to say I quite liked about Peterhead's highlights for this, is that they because sometimes highlights can just be really short clips, like straight away you're into a piece of action. But what I quite liked about them, there's probably about, before each big, literally the highlights, you probably had about 10 seconds of play before something kicked in. And I really liked how you got to see how that incident developed there, with pretty much everyone from the both benches spilling to shove one another. It was a really bad tackle to make, and it's a bad tackle to make in that part of the pitch. When you do something in front of the dugouts, it's going to kick off like that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I said he could have done that tackle on the other side and nobody probably bats an eyelid, but it's that thing that whenever it happens in front of a dugout, everything just gets heightened.
Yes,
and I looked at it, and I mean, nothing had happened in the first half really up until that stage. I think Max Barry had hit the bar by that point, and both sides had maybe had one chance each. Aside from that, nothing had really happened. And then you had this big sort of scrap that developed out of nowhere. It was almost like out of boredom. Like, nothing else is happening. Shall we just start a fight? And what I really liked about it, or really enjoyed, was the speed at which Stevie Farrell darts into the away dugout to just get into the middle of it. I asked him about it afterwards, or the programme editor made a wee comment. He was like, you can take the boy out the scheme.
How did Peterhead look?
Fine. I think they obviously rested a few. I know Kieran Shanks is out injured at the moment, and Rory McAllister didn't feature at all. Max Barry looked very, very good. Thought he was the best player on the park by a mile. I didn't know anything about him going into it, because it's the Challenge Cup, I hadn't taken a great deal of interest. And watching him, I assumed he was maybe on loan from Aberdeen or something like that, like a younger player who was full-time and then was out on loan at Peterhead, but they actually signed him from Buckie Thistle.
Yeah.
He looks very, very capable. Maybe, I mean, it seems weird with Highland League players that they're very, very hit or miss, but Peterhead seem to have a decent success rate. So I'm thinking like Hamish Ritchie, and they obviously lost him over the summer. Max Barry's a different sort of player, but looks like a similar amount of a threat. I think of all the shots Peterhead had in the game, and I'm trying to think, they must have had maybe 5 or 6 shots on target. He probably had 4, maybe more than that. He was their biggest threat all game long, and he thoroughly, thoroughly deserved to be the guy who scored the winning goal. Their goalkeeper, Blessing Oluemi, I think it is, he made an excellent save at the end from Greg Young. His first thing he did was kind of fumble out a cross, and I thought, we can maybe test this guy. And then we spent the next 88 minutes not testing him, but just normal back passes were going to him, and he was, scuffing clearances low or putting them out the park. And I just thought there was a point in the second half where Jason Brown had played a back pass and just told him, like, relax. I think he showed something like, time, relax, something like that. He'd turn around to go back up the pitch, and Oluemi had scalped on the back of, like, the kind of back of the shoulder with the clearance. I don't think he took your advice. So he maybe looked a wee bit iffy, but they've got Stuart McKenzie who'll come in when for the proper games, and he'll be absolutely fine there. So I thought Peterhead were fine. I don't think there's a massive amount between the bottom end of League 2, the bottom end of League 1 and the top end of League 2, and that basically confirmed it. And if you had the 2 first teams out, would you get a similar game? Maybe broadly, yeah. I mean, Suns improved when they brought on Michael Ruth and Carlo Pinatiello and Craig McGuffey especially, but these are all guys who'll be starting every week, and none of the guys on the fringes really did a great deal.
If you want to hear more about what's going on at Dumbarton Football Club, when we finish up this podcast, Fraser and I are going to take a deep dive into The Rock. I think actually it popped in my head there was a Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery movie, not that one. That's where Dumbarton play their home games, if you didn't know. One final thing in this game that I did find strange, when Max Barry scored the goal, they played the Hawaii 5-0 theme over the tannoy. Now, the only time I've ever really seen that is when, it's mostly at Celtic Park, to be honest, but when they score 5 goals, that's the music that is played. Why would you score it when you just go 1-up? Why would you play it when you just go 1-up? I don't understand it.
See, even if they had some beef with us because they'd beaten us 5-0 or something, they did beat us 5-0 a few seasons ago, I'd quite like that. But as far as I know, there's no beef nor any reason behind that.
No, that's what you think. Tell that to Joel Mbongo. He's started that beef. This is where the long-stemmed dislike, the enmity between Peterhead and Dumbarton. It started on Saturday. And we'll stick with losers and we'll stick in with the northeast of Scotland. And we're going to talk about Paul Hartley, the Cove Rangers manager, because just when you think he's back in business after beating Montrose last weekend, he chucks away all that good work by conceding 2 goals at the death to East Kilbride. That's a part-time team in the Lowland League, lest we forget. And, you know, as we mentioned right at the top of this podcast, a team like Cove Rangers, their season is not going to be defined by a third-round Challenge Cup defeat to a team like East Kilbride, but it's another result that does not reflect well on Paul Hartley.
No, and you do wonder how much longer this can go on. So I'd thought Cove's form seems like it's been terrible for a very long time now. So I jumped on and took their form back to the start of the year. Because they had that spell, I think it was the spell that Rumarn Burrell had, that really, really hot spell where he scored 12 goals in 8 games or something ridiculous like that.
But they went in a period, I think it was around when they went into the second quarter last season, they won 7 games in the bounce.
Yep. And that papered over a lot of cracks. So looking at it, they've won 8 games out of the 30 they've played since the turn of the year. That's Brora, Annan, Edinburgh City twice, Kelty, Stirling Albion, Dunfermline and Montrose. So the only teams they've beaten who would be maybe above them are Montrose last week and Dunfermline in the Cup. Now that's a cracking result, but Dunfermline obviously have their own issues. So you're looking at the teams they've beaten there are teams you would expect a team like Cove to beat most of the time. And you kind of wonder, so in my head I have, Cove, they've got a big budget, you know, they've still got a decent nucleus of a squad there, they won't go down to League 2. But then you start to wonder and you think, well, why not? Like, that Cove squad is probably weaker than the Queen of the South squad last season, and they almost went down. And this league looks a lot closer than it was last season. There's certainly no Edinburgh City in this league. So I would be massively concerned if I was a Cove fan about what direction they're heading in. And I still think I wouldn't be shocked to see them sort of flicker into some sort of life. Like when they played us for spells, maybe 10, 15 minutes, then they drop out the game. They looked very, very good. The
same when they played Stennismuir. There were times in that first half when you see Fraser Fivey pick up the ball, running from deep, and you think, what on earth are you doing playing at this level? You should be playing higher up. But then, when he falls out of the game, when Declan Glass falls out of the game, then it's like, yes, you're down here for a reason.
Yeah, and it was Declan Glass against us. In the first 15 minutes or so, I was watching him going, this guy's great. This is a brilliant move from just to drop down to this level, be the star man, get himself back up and running, and he'll be full-time next year. And then from about, just after his penalty miss, which I think was 20 or so minutes in, didn't really notice him until a wee spell in the second half, and then didn't really notice him again. And it felt almost like their tactics were, give him the ball and he'll do something. So we just crowded him out. We just forced him deeper and deeper, and he's not going to do something if he's splitting your centre halves. So I wonder about this Cove side, and I also wonder if Hartley had been anyone else, would he still be in a job? Because I think it's very hard to think he would be.
We don't want to repeat discussions that we've had on previous podcasts about the situation at Cove Rangers. I think we spoke about them at length after they lost to Stennismuir, but yeah, it really feels it's like we're in the death throes of Paul Hartley's time at Cove Rangers manager, but it feels like we've been in the death throes of his time as Cove Rangers manager for a while now.
And it feels like there's so little interest. Again, I don't want that to come across as arsey or anything like that. There's so little interest that he can probably stay there. Like, they've got such a limited home support that it's not like there's going to be 400 or 500 people like there would be at a bigger, say, Arbroath. Like Jim McIntyre's position was completely untenable because he had lost that support, and they were very vocal. And above all else, they're the fans who are turning up, who are buying their kits, who are buying their tickets for games and whatever else. Cove, it feels like they rely on hospitality a lot. And if you are going for an away day with your company, you probably don't really care about the manager of the team. So it sounds a daft thing to say, but they're maybe a bit of a unique club in that regard, where any other club would have to listen to their fan base, but their core fan base is so small that maybe doesn't matter. Yeah.
I don't like saying it, but I don't think that's an unfair thing to say. I think when we spoke about them on the big preview podcast, if you haven't listened to it, please go and do so. But when Sean and I spoke about them, he described them in very similar terms. He said it's a club who seem to put hospitality first and then the football second. But it just seems difficult, not to repeat ourselves, the experiment in moving into full-time football at Cove, it's not really worked for anyone. And you could be just a very good part-time team. I look at Peterhead, for instance. I think Peterhead are generally like a good part-time team. You know, I mean, obviously they had that really bad season when Jim McInally left, and they had David Robertson in for a while, and then Strachan and Brown have to basically pilot the team as they're going down into League Two. But broadly, they're a very good side, and I think that I'm sure players have spoken about them in the past, the unique challenges they've had when they had the hybrid squad of players from the Central Belt and players from the North East. I'm going to assume it's mostly just North-based players now. But even so, people, when they talk about Peterhead, I think everyone has looked very, very well after there, just in terms of like hospitality, food, etc., and so on. So there's no reason why Cove Rangers can't do that. I'm not saying that these people aren't looked well after at Cove Rangers, but it seems like a lot of money's been spent on very little return.
Yeah, and did you see the attendance for this game? I know it was obviously at East Kilbride, but an international weekend with an East Kilbride team who are doing really, really well and have been for a number of years, and the attendance was apparently 235. Come on. This is the perfect weekend, and this isn't a dig at East Kilbride or Cove or anyone. This is a dig at the people of East Kilbride above all else. There's no Rangers game. There's no Celtic game. Scotland played on whenever it was, the Thursday night. Like, why wouldn't you go to that? As a neutral, if I lived in East Kilbride or if I lived in that neck of the woods, I'd look at that and think, I'd fancy East Kilbride's chances of getting a result.
You're a weird guy, Fraser, though. You and I are weird folk that do these kind of things, that go to games that don't involve our team. Whereas that's a very interesting. I hadn't paid attention to the attendance, but I would have thought that for East Kilbride, that is your market. You're going to become, for some people, a first team, and that's class, but for a lot of people, you might be a second team to Rangers Celtic, and the fact that not many of them chose to go to the game. I don't know if it's not exactly a high stakes game and so on. You know, you've got to contextualise it with the fact that it is the Challenge Cup, but even so, that's quite a disappointing attendance.
Yeah, and I just feel like they maybe, and I know people don't like East Kilbride and whatever and all that sort of stuff, but get behind them a wee bit. And it's different because Clydebank have the history, but I was at the Clydebank Elgin City game in the Scottish Cup a few years ago.
Oh yeah, it was on the television, wasn't it, on the Monday night?
I was sold out. And, you know, granted that was, I think, their first game live on TV. It might have been their first game against a league side in the Scottish Cup since they re-entered it or got back in as the sort of new Phoenix club, Clydebank. But it was a brilliant occasion. Now, I'm not saying that they could get anything like that for a Challenge Cup game when they've had much bigger games over the past year. But if Clydebank can sell out for a midweek game live on telly against Elgin, like, come on, people of East Kilbride, get behind your team.
I started watching the highlights for this game on YouTube, and I thought to myself, like, I wonder why the teams are being bagpiped out onto the pitch. So that seems pretty. Now you're giving this a fair degree of ceremony for just a Challenge Cup tie. Turns out it was the playoffs from 5 years ago that I was watching. I didn't realise. I just typed in Cove East Kilbride into YouTube and was met with that. And there were no highlights from this game, so that's why we can't really talk about the match itself or the goals or anything like that. But yeah, that was. I was like, Craig, you dumpling.
Just on a completely, a sort of semi-related note, because I know they're a team that you have a degree of interest in. Apparently, there was 5 people in the home end for the Broomhill against Linlithgow Rose game.
Saw that, I read that in Pine Bovril. And yeah, again, there's another team. We talk about Cove Rangers, at least they have got a tangible fan base and a tangible history that you can look back on. But Broomhill, like what's the point? What's the point?
I don't understand it. And that's maybe a point for another podcast. But yeah, when I saw that, I just thought, you've got your varying degrees of clubs who have maybe not got the history, or some do too. If you're East Kilbride, do have a history and then a reformed team. Cove Rangers obviously have a pretty long history in the Highland League, but they maybe feel like they've reformed or they've got this 2.0 version. And then there's just a stage where people lose interest or the money drops out and you're kind of like, what are you left with? And Broomhill are kind of the opposite of that. They've not really started with anything to be left with anything. So I don't understand it.
What have we seen from Broomhill? We've seen they've played at 4 different grounds. This is over the past decade, 11 years, 4 different grounds, 4 name changes. BSC Glasgow, Broomhill, Open Goal Broomhill, back to Broomhill, and 4 badge changes as well. Very difficult for people to buy into that unless you're directly associated with the club. I mean, and those 5 fans, those are 5 potential Dumbarton fans that they've stolen away from you since they decided to put down roots in your neck of the woods.
That's 5% of our potential fan base or something like that. But then you look at it and you think, well, if East Kilbride and Cove can't attract decent numbers when they've been really, really successful, what are you trying to... And they've been rooted in those areas. Like East Kilbride, to be fair, very rooted in the community.
Yeah, building a new ground and all that sort of stuff.
And a big youth system and a big town with no senior team in it. And they are struggling with it. So how are you going to do it when you're named after an area of the West End of Glasgow, but you played games in Clackmannanshire, Weston Bartonshire and Maryhill? Like, I don't really understand it.
Yeah, maybe that's one for Fowler. Fowler, if you can locate a Broomhill fan to do a podcast with, I think that's a really good idea. And yeah, you might be wondering why we've spoken about the loser from this tie, and that's Paul Hartley. Why aren't we focusing on the winner? And the reason we've chosen not to really talk about Mick Kennedy is because on Monday he tweeted, "We have allowed society and social media to dictate how you look, how you act, what you say, how you dream. To be the best version of yourself, the environment you place yourself in, the people you surround yourself with are so important. You can achieve anything. Dream big." And for that tweet alone, we will not be focusing on any aspect of East Kilbride's performance. Now, we'll stay, we're in the northeast at the moment. We'll go about 100 miles towards the Highland capital, Inverness, and we're going to talk about two winners. And this is people called Adam, who play for the Cali Jags, because Adam Brooks got two and Adam McKinnon got the other in their 3-0 win over Stirling Albion.
And the first thing I want to say is I watched Duncan Ferguson's post-match before I watched the highlights from this.
Oh, right, I see. I didn't see it at all. What did he say?
Would you like to guess what one of the major things he mentioned looking ahead? So they've came off this 3-0 victory, clean sheet, 3 goals at home. The post-match is maybe 4 minutes. Would you like to guess something that gets a mention?
Right, go and tell me who they're playing at the weekend.
It's Alloa Athletic.
Now, right, I'm going to have to think. Alloa Athletic, they play on a synthetic surface. And I'm going to assume he was saying that they played so well against Stirling because they were in grass, and they're not going to play well because they're moving on to plastic.
Yes, what it sounded like he was doing was laying the excuses for footballers. Do not give them excuses. Do not give footballers excuses because they will take them. And the thing is, I watched this before, so I've only seen the goals from this game because they just went up when I was looking through it. But I watched this before I'd seen the goals. And I came away from it feeling a bit deflated from an Inverness point of view. So it goes along the lines of, we're still quite a young team. We gave them a few chances at the end. I'm just glad to get the clean sheet. We've got the plastic pitch. You know, very much stressing how good the defenders were, maybe above anything else. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe this game was a bit more taxing than the 3-0 scoreline would suggest. And maybe it was. I've only seen the goals from it. But yeah, that kind of, I don't know, I thought it was strange. It was like a strange way to do it. He did say, it's a professional performance and all the things you'd expect to say. But I just felt like he was laying the groundwork for a defeat next week and just a wee bit downbeat.
Yeah, it's just really. I think that just feeds into what we've come to expect from Duncan Ferguson, and that's to be like let down and disappointed. Said it number of times, numerous number of times that we all thought Duncan Ferguson's footballing team would really match his personality when he was a player, and it just hasn't been the case. And yeah, all we seem to get from him in his post-match interviews like just excuses and like setups for disappointments like further down the line, and I'll say it's disappointing, but disappointment has to come if there's a degree of expectation. This is what we've come to expect from every Duncan Ferguson post-match interview. It's said to Sean a couple of weeks ago, it's the new Dave counter. It's when Duncan Ferguson mentions a plastic pitch in his post-match interview.
At least you'll have no hassle with coming to our Bowling Green grass pitch in like November or whenever it is that they're playing down there. I'm sure you'll love that. You'll relish that.
The goals, what do you make of these goals? I mean, you mentioned there that the highlights, and literally the highlights of this game, all three of them, I think it's 1 minute 40 seconds is the video clip. Any comment to make on the goals from Brooks and McKinnon?
So I like the look of Adam McKinnon on the opening day of the season. I thought he looked like being a real shining light in that Inverness team, just somebody with a bit of drive about them. And when I think that was the first game he'd played for them since signing, so I'm guessing he maybe didn't have a full pre-season underneath him, and he faded out the game and got subbed off just after the hour mark, and they dropped off a cliff after that. But he looks like he's getting up to speed now. And it's him and Adam Brooks who combined for the first goal. It's a really nice goal, actually. So Brooks is playing right on the shoulder, which again is something that's mentioned by Duncan Ferguson, that he'd played him, I think, deeper or wide earlier in the season. He's playing right in the shoulder. The pace he shows to outpace the two defenders, and it's a really clever finish.
Yeah.
Kind of gives the goalkeeper the eyes and then just sends it the wrong way, and it's a really composed, calm finish. And I'm really interested to see how Adam Brooks gets on, because he's somebody that I had our eye on for Suns getting in on loan in January just past. So he's ex-Dumbarton United, he's from Bon Hill, so he's from like 10 minutes outside Dumbarton. And we followed him at the paper all the way through his journey. So he's always somebody that I've just kind of kept half an eye on to see how he's getting on. And it looks like he could be someone that benefits from Inverness being in the position that they're in, first of all, but also who could benefit from the way that Billy Mackay's changed as a player. So Mackay now is dropping a lot deeper to get involved with the play. Maybe Lincoln play a lot more than they did. He's maybe not quite the fox in the box type striker that he was. Yeah. And I just wonder if somebody like Brooks, who's got that bit of pace, that bit of dynamism about him, he's only 19, 20 years old, so he's got the legs, he could then buzz around Mackay and learn so much from playing alongside him. Like, Billy Mackay's been a phenomenal player. The amount of goals he's scored, Adam Brooks is bound to learn things from playing alongside him. So I was glad to see him getting on the score sheet. He took his goal very well. The second one's a free kick, which takes a huge deflection, and there's a big element of luck in that. And I just think that him and McKinnon bring... That Inverness team is lacking excitement. It's lacking spark. But between the two of them, you look like there might be something there. McKinnon's direct running. He's like an intelligent runner, if that makes sense. You see him running into good areas and good bits of space, maybe not natural ones, but he'll drift into like wee pockets of space in between where a winger would be and where a central midfielder would be. He just seems to have that footballing brain that he knows where to be. And he maybe looks like somebody as well who has been at Ross County, I think he had a decent loan spell at Montrose. He went to Falkirk, not sure that really worked out, didn't really work out at Arbroath, but he looks like somebody who's maybe got that hunger to get himself back to the level that he believes he's capable of playing at. So I enjoyed watching the two of them. Again, McKinnon's goal, which I think, based on the 1 minute 30 of highlights, looked like it was probably deserved for his performance.
Looked like a deflection. I think it takes a really close range deflection before sort of spinning away and into the net. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it takes a big deflection. There's a big chunk of luck. I think he deserved the goal for the performance, but that also shows the space that he picks up. Like, just drifting into that wee bit of room, he seems to be one of these players who's just good at finding space. So I think it was a good weekend for the two of them. I'm not sure what this means for Inverness moving forward. I'm not sure. Again, I think McKinnon's obviously more than capable of being a League One player. I think Brooks still has to prove that. He's still not really proven in, that sort of level, but what he did show is that he would cause problems in League Two, which means certainly at the bottom end of League One, like, he should cause teams like Dumbarton problems. And he played against us on the opening day and he looked okay, but their whole team just looked a bit sluggish that day, especially when McKinnon went off and then Brooks got taken off soon after. So I think it was a good day for the two of them. I think it was a good day for Inverness, because you'd probably have fancied them to get through that tie, but to get through it and score 3 goals, despite Duncan Ferguson sounding like it wasn't all that exciting, but to get through it, score 3 goals, for Adam Brooks to score a couple, albeit with the aid of deflection in the second one, all felt really quite positive, and maybe that mood around Inverness is starting to change a wee bit.
Yes, I worry that Inverness are going to turn good at some point. I think that they've put back-to-back wins for the first time this season. And I know there's big question marks over Duncan Ferguson. There's questions about how good the squad is, and you're not going to judge a season based on the fact that they beat a sort of transitional Stirling Albion side. But I do think there's more to come from this team, and I can imagine them hitting their stride into the second half of the season. Obviously, you're a full-time team in a part-time division. That comes with many advantages, and I can see them at some point just pulling off into the distance. One thing I do want to say though is, like, Ross McGeechy, the Stirling Albion captain, his body language in that first goal, I don't know if you noticed it, but when Brooks gets slipped through, McGeechy sort of slows down and he looks into there as if to say, oh fucking hell, just as Brooks finishes. And that's the second time, like, on this podcast where I've commented on Ross McGeechy's body language. We did it when Stirling Albion lost 4-0 to East Fife, when I think it was Adam Laref that took the ball past him. And I know that the game state there was like 4-0 down, and he'd spent all day being pulled apart by, like, Nathan Austin. But even then I just thought, you're the captain. You shouldn't be giving up like that.
Maybe one of these players who needs a move. Like, he's been a very good servant. He's been there a long time, and he just needs something to get that fire back. I wonder if it's just something like that. It's maybe just a season too long. And I know there was a lot of talk that he was going to be leaving them at the end of last season. I don't know if he was actually released or if it was just that he wasn't offered a deal until Maybury came in, or quite what happened. But I remember there was talk about him moving on after we beat them in the playoffs, and people saying, oh, it would be a sorry way for him to end his time. And I wonder if it's maybe just nothing better's came up where he's been offered it and thought, "Ugh, I'll take it." But maybe somebody would benefit from a move just to reignite things, because I think he made his debut against Dumbarton, or certainly the season that they got relegated, going back to when he was 17 or 18, the season they got relegated that they started with Jockey Scott in charge. So he's been there a very long time now.
I mean, I don't want to read too much into two very short clips. There'll be people who watch Ross McGeechy every week and will have a far better idea. But those are just two observations that I made. Now, we're talking about winners called Adam. Let's talk about losers called Craig. And me, Craig, I am the biggest loser of the whole weekend because I chose not to go to Stennismuir's victory over Falkirk. Instead, I followed the game on Flash Score because this wasn't a match I was particularly interested in. I thought that there was 20 quid to go. Falkirk had beaten Stennismuir just about 6 weeks ago in the League Cup, had beaten them 4-0, sort of 4-0 going in about 14-0. And yeah, even John McGlynn wasn't all that interested in going. He was recovering from hip replacement surgery. However, Stennismuir won on penalties, finished 1-1 in normal time, went to penalties. Cole Donaldson missed Falkirk's first penalty, and Ross Meakin scored the winner 5-4, sending the Warriors through to the next round. And yeah, I kind of feel as though I can't gloat about it properly because I went on the Falkirk Daft podcast last Sunday, to talk about it and basically said that that's why I wasn't going. Had it been a league game or had it been the Scottish Cup, 100% would have been there. Challenge Cup, not really that fussed. So if you're not fussed about the result, then you can't get too fussed if your team does the business, and especially if you're not there to see it.
And you know the reason I particularly felt for you? Well, two. Firstly, it was Falkirk. And secondly, it's Ross Meakin who scores the winning penalty. And like nobody would have felt more pride. Maybe his mum if she was there or someone like that. But nobody else would have felt more pride than you at seeing him stroke away the penalty to beat Falkirk.
It was great. I was watching the Falkirk TV highlights and they're very good. And you've got Sean Elderbrandt's a very accomplished commentator. And you can just listen to him over the seasons. He's getting better and better as he goes on. But he said Ross Meakin's probably the most successful player in Stennismuir's history. There's no probably about it. He is the most successful player in Stennismuir's history because he's got one promotion and he's got a league winners medal. So just that promotion has just put him on a pedestal above everyone else. And he's a lovely guy, and it's great to see him do the business. But I think that it's probably, I'd say about like 4 times out of 5, this is a match that Falkirk would have won. They'd have probably won it about 2 or 3-0. But they really didn't take their chances in this game. And I know that Darren Jameson got the Man of the Match award, but I don't really think he wasn't asked to do anything that wasn't quite comfortable for him. A lot of the shots were like hit quite close to him. If he hadn't made any of those saves, you'd have perhaps said, wow, that's a bit of a mistake from Darren Jameson. I don't think he was particularly tested. He just did what he had to do. And then Blair Alston gets a penalty, scores it. Stunning equaliser from Calvin Miller. It's an absolutely glorious free kick. And it goes to penalties. I don't think that the penalties were of a particularly high calibre, if I'm being honest. I actually thought that perhaps a better goalkeeper than Nicky Hogarth would have saved Ross Meakin's penalty. But nevertheless, he didn't. And it's Stennismuir who progress.
I enjoyed watching the ball boys behind the goal for all the Falkirk penalties as well. Just kind of like dancing about and just giving it all that. And you can see that they sort of lost interest. So the first couple of penalties, there's maybe a bigger group and they're really going for it. But by the 4th and 5th Falkirk penalties, they've just kind of drifted. They've drifted away. They've sort of lost interest. It's the TikTok generation. You don't have the attention span for a full penalty shootout.
If you don't have the attention span for a penalty shootout, God help you. But yeah, I wonder, like, if I was thinking about it from a Falkirk fan's perspective, and I think it's probably very similar to yourself going out to Peterhead, where, yeah, it'd have been nice to have progressed. And I'm sure, actually, as I said in that Falkirk Daft podcast, I think Falkirk would have been favourites to win this, or certainly one of the favourites to win it. But I think on the whole, they played well. They were down to 10 men as well for the final 20 minutes after. Difficult to see, and I think there was a bit of debate as to whether or not Liam Henderson elbowed Matty Aitken. But the linesman standing like a yard away from the incident, so I'm going to trust his judgment in that regard. But yeah, they'll be disappointed, and Brad's disappointed that they didn't give Stennismuir another kicking in that. But that's hard lines.
Yeah, I think the red card is obviously, like you say, it's impossible to see from that angle. It doesn't look great though. Like when I saw it, I thought, he's that's probably a red card. You can't see exactly where his elbow goes or whatever, but it looks like he's given a linesman who is 6 centimetres away a decision to make. Probably not going to get that one wrong. But I think you're bang on with Falkirk. From their point of view, see if they had turned in a stinker of a performance and got beaten 3-0, maybe there would have been worry. They go, like you say, most times they probably do take their chances, they probably do win that game. And it's just one of those that come the end of the season, assuming Falkirk go on to have a decent season, and if they get to the playoffs or if they even push, in towards winning the league or getting into the Premiership, they're not going to think about this game again. Maybe if from this point onwards they go winless in their next 10, they'll go, that was this one that started the rot, but I don't see that happening.
We can only hope. And we mentioned as well, similar to talking, harkening back to the point we made about Dumbarton's fringe players, I think it was a bad week for Ryan Shanley in particular, because the way that Falkirk's set up is something we've described in this podcast a number of times. Like Ross McKeever is probably Falkirk's most important player in the way he knits that attack together. And this is an opportunity for Ryan Shanley, who is very much the second choice, to show that he's got what it takes. Missed a really good chance in the first half where I think it was a header that was flicked him at the back post and he shoots it right down at Darren Jamieson's knees. And then, perhaps worst of all, they win a penalty. Kyle Jacobs, weirdly, the second penalty he's conceded against Falkirk this season. But I can't remember who he fouls in the box, and Shanley, as he runs up, he slips and kicks the ball twice, which is obviously a foul. And I don't think that Ross McKeever will be having much to worry about going forward.
No, and I imagine that Ryan Shanley will be a player who's probably on the radar of quite a few League One clubs now if Falkirk were interested in loaning him out. But if not, certainly come January, I can see him at Asteni, at Alloa, Montrose, someone like that who need a striker who will come in and certainly push for that first team position. And, dare I say it, that he could go to quite a lot of League One teams and probably be playing and starting games every single week. Just maybe a bit like Jordan Allen, maybe just not up to that next level at Falkirk, but a very capable player at League One level. Someone who maybe if Falkirk hadn't loaned out Allen, they would have loaned out him. But I'm guessing Allen's maybe a higher earner, so he makes more sense to loan out.
Yeah, I think so. And given that Falkirk have got this very big League Cup tie with Celtic coming up at Celtic Park, I imagine some of the spoils from that will be used to sign a striker who perhaps is someone who can give Ross McKeever the competition the club are looking for. But no, hardlines Falkirk. And I think that for all that we're focusing on them, I think it was actually a really hard-won performance from Stennismuir. I think they battled really hard, showed real organisation, showed a lot of grit, showed a lot of resolve, and certainly a complete night-and-day performance from what we saw from them earlier in the season. I'm going to assume so because I wasn't there to see it. And you've got Rangers B or Fraserborough in the next round, and I'm not likely to be at either match either.
Is that at home or away?
Away.
Fraserborough away might be fun.
Depends if it's the midweek, perhaps not. Rangers B be easy enough to get to, but then I actually don't agree with the B team clubs in this competition at all. Overseas teams, good laugh, bring them back. B teams, no.
Yes, I'm with you on that one. I would not be going if it was Rangers B, and we seem to draw them about 9 seasons in a row.
Ah yes, where Ali Love broke the leg of Scotland's next number 9.
Yet where they hammed it up so much, post-match said he'd be lucky to play again that season, and he was back training 3 weeks later.
Oh dear. Who's Ali Love playing for? Where's Ali Love now?
Darvel. Saw him playing for Hurlford last season, or Hurlford last season, but he's at Darvel now. Right,
okay. And where's Alex Lowry now?
I saw he was linked with Carlisle. I don't know if he went. I've not really noticed. To be fair, he looked, in the first time that we played Rangers B, he looked like an absolute world beater. Yeah. I wasn't at the game where he scored, I think he scored 3 or 4 against us when they beat us 7-0, the infamous Ali Love game. I'm going to assume he played very, very well that day too, but let me just have a wee look. No, he's still at Rangers, but just a guy who's not really kicked on. And I think it's an attitude thing because by all accounts, from speaking to a player who played in the 7-0 game, he was making wee jibes about how much he earned, and that's what prompted Ali Love to send him into the stand.
Right. I thought it was well as I remember doing a podcast with a former Suns and former Stennismuir striker, who, as you said, it's at that stage you're taking the piss. We can't be having that. Can't be having that.
I wonder if we were talking to the same man about this.
Well, I mean, we talked about me being the biggest loser that's likely to appear on this podcast. Well, like, stick with losers. We'll talk about Queen of the South, who lost 3-0 at Palmerston to Airdrieonians. Now, well, there's no shame in that. Airdrie are obviously a club from a higher division. This is a Doonhamers' third consecutive defeat, and it's the third consecutive match where they have failed to score a goal. They did hit the post through Josh Walker, and Leighton McIntosh fired over the bar from close range at the death, but other than that, going through a bit of a barren period, Peter Murphy's team.
Yeah, 279 minutes since they last scored, according to a man on Pine Bovril, who I just assumed would know that better than me, and I didn't bother to look at it. But yeah, they obviously had a really decent start under Peter Murphy, and he's a manager that I like a lot. So I would caveat all this by saying his Annan teams never started the season well. It was always how they finished.
That's a good point.
So I wouldn't be getting too worked up. A few years ago, we played them, I think it was the weekend the clocks changed. We beat them 1-0. We went top of the league. They were bottom of the league, and they went on to get promoted that season, and we didn't. And they beat us 6-0, obviously, in the playoffs. So I would caveat it all with that. But they do look like a side who are defensively, maybe not in this game, but defensively look pretty solid in League One. You look at their attacking options, and I think a lot is going to hinge on how good Fraser Bryden is. So I've seen him bits and bobs in air, particularly in the Friday night games where he'd maybe come on as a sub. I think there's something there. But is he going to be the guy who's going to come in and score the goals that ultimately can win you a league? Because that has to be Queen of the South's aim this season, and I'm not sure he is. And if he isn't, Leighton McIntosh, he had a really, really stinking game in this. I think it was his man, Adam Frizzell was his man for the opening goal, and then he missed a good few chances. Just seems to be lacking any sort of composure in the final third or any confidence there. He's only scored once since he came in against Dumbarton. It's a bit of a trait of his career, actually. But he's a decent player. Is Leighton McIntosh going to score you the goals to win the league? Not sure he is. And then who else have they got? They've got Kyle Doherty, who's not had a good time there, and I think he's been converted into
a wide midfielder.
Yeah, and he looks like he could maybe do a job as a winger, not in a sort of aesthetically pleasing way, but just in being like big, physical, quick, that sort of thing. But he's not going to score you goals. They had Xander Craik, who's on loan from Kilmarnock. He played against us in the League Cup, so that was 2 months or so ago now. But he looked a bit like a development league player. Like, again, not somebody who I looked at and thought, you're going to cause a lot of problems to defences in this league this season. And beyond that, there's not really that many natural striking options. So I think that Fraser Bryden is kind of the player that they, not their season hinges on, because I'm not convinced how strong League One is, full stop. And I think they do have a good defence, and I think a good defence will, as Stenny proved last year, a good defence wins you leagues.
Mm-hmm.
But I do just wonder if there's maybe just that lack of firepower, and it's a lot of eggs to be putting in his basket for somebody who has shown flashes at Ayr United, and maybe never anything beyond that.
Just on Bryden, I think the general consensus is that he is a player who should have had loan spells much earlier in his career, and it feels as though that despite the fact he has been in and around the Ayr United first team, I'm not sure how many appearances he's made, but I think if you were to tally up the number of minutes that he's actually appeared on the football pitch, I don't think it would be that many. And I think that when he was a younger player, it might have benefited from a spell, Girvan, someone like when you're like 16, 17, have the loan spells that toughen you up, and then you come into the United first team. Whereas he just seems to be a guy that's not developed properly, and that's why he's at the stage, 19 years old, and he'll be learning on Queen of the South's dime. And that's when you get to this level, these are the sort of players that when you're taking guys on loan, that's the majority of the players are all young guys with a bit to learn. And I do think that Bryden certainly had a lot of options. I think about 4 teams that were looking to take him on loan. Obviously, wanted to stay full time, so went to Queen of the South. But yeah, it's a big. I think there is a fair degree of expectation on him, and just at this stage, I'm not sure if he's able to meet them.
He's maybe fallen a wee bit, and different sorts of players entirely, but a wee bit into the Craig McGuffey category. So remember, McGuffey was at Ayr for a long, long time, and I just got his stats up there because I knew they were a bit ridiculous. 12 starts, 65 substitute appearances in the league. And you feel like he is another one who, he did have loan spells out at Glenafton, but if he'd gone maybe to Stranraer for a season after that, and then maybe someone in League One and just built himself up gradually, then he maybe would have gone on to become a more of a staple player there. Maybe not, maybe this is him finding his level, but Bryden's in a similar category, especially the sort of player he is. You can imagine if he's playing development football, he's finding it quite easy to bully guys.
Yeah.
Got that physicality about him, where if he's coming up against another 18, 19-year-old, he can push them around a fair bit. But then he comes up against your kind of a Gregor Buchanan, a Mark Durnan, your run-of-the-mill League One centre-halves who are just huge, experienced, and know how to use their body. And it'll be interesting to see how he does. Because, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he does turn out to be really successful for them. But I think it's a lot of pressure to be on someone at that stage in his career. And I suppose Peter Murphy might be the ideal man, because he took Tommy Goss, who has that kind of big, strapping stature, turned him from somebody who didn't look like he really knew how to use his body into being the best striker in League Two. Like, he looked a bit uncomfortable in his own body. Like, it's like his body was a size too big for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then now or certainly last time I saw him playing in League Two, he was one of the best strikers in the division. So I wonder if he's maybe seen something like that he can try and bring out of him. Imagine
the Tom Hanks movie Big, but instead it's Tommy Goss as a wee boy who turns into sort of Tommy Goss the football player. Maybe that's what his Tommy Goss is actually 7 years old. Who knows? Yeah, I always found that about Goss as well. Like, I think that when you look at Goss, you'd be like, shit, we're going to have to mark this guy. And I mean, he is. Yeah, there are times when Goss, we've spoken about Goss loads of times in this podcast, where you're thinking, why are you playing at this level? You should be, all the things that you've got, the natural gifts, you should be playing at a higher level. But then there are times when he does look a bit uncoordinated and he can be pushed around a bit. And you're right, I think Bryden perhaps falls into that category. But hope not. He can do Queen of South a good turn and then go back and do the same for Airdrieonians. But we'll give, this is a loser, and this is perhaps, this is the least memorable game of football I've ever been to in my life. And it's Spartans 0, Livingston 2. I was there on Saturday. I chose to spend the day out in Edinburgh instead of going to Stennismere versus Falkirk. But I do want to say I was spending the day with Christy Aitchison. I don't know if you met him before.
No, I actually only know of him through the podcast, but I would very much like to meet him, judging by your comments on him.
Christy Aitchison is absolutely tremendous company. I was there with Christy Aitchison and his mate Lewis. So we went to Ainsley Park, went to a couple of pubs afterwards. Just sterling company. I can't say I know Christy that well, but when you're with him, you just feel $1 million, and I certainly felt $1 million on Saturday. However, this is a game where I can't remember anything from it. I had to go and watch the Livingston highlights. Sorry, it was the Livingston's basically kind of story of the match highlights, which are actually quite well put together. A nice 3-minute video about just how the game went from an alternative angle, and then the Spartans highlights. And I can see myself in the highlights, but I'm actually not sure it's actually me. Because I say I can't really remember a single thing about it. And I watched the goals back, goals from Stevie May, goals from Lewis Smith. I was like, all right, is that what happened? It was a game that just completely washed over me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a great deal to add. If you were at the game and you don't have anything to say, I'm interested to see how Stevie May gets on at Livingston. How did he look?
I don't remember. I mean, he did open the scoring, but I watched it back. It's like a second phase. I think is it Montano that tries to cross the ball in. It gets cleared. The Montano wins it back and takes into space. And you can see this is especially on the story of the match highlights from Livingston. It's just the Spartans' defence completely switches off. He literally walks towards the 6-yard box and no one goes with him. Everyone just completely switches off around him. So it's a really bad goal to lose. I'm going to assume a couple of nice touches. It was just one of those games where nothing interesting happened, where it was just a full-time team, a decent full-time team from the Championship is taking on a team from a couple of divisions below it, and we're just better than them. And I know that Spartans, since they've come into the SPFL, when it comes to these sort of games, when they are the underdogs, they always seem to rise to the occasion. We've seen it against Dundee United in the League Cup. We saw that against Ross County in the League Cup, and that set them very nicely for a game against Aberdeen they've got to look forward to. But in this game, I
wonder if their previous results as well meant that, first of all, Livingston would look at that and think, right, if they were playing another League 2 team, maybe they would kind of underestimate them. They go, right, okay, we can't underestimate this mob. And there'll be a lot of clips to do your homework on how they've played when they played against these bigger teams and what they've done to be successful. And I wonder if that's why they just treated it fully professionally, did extensive amounts of homework on them and thought, right, we know how to get a result here.
Yeah, professional's the right word there. Professional's the right word. The only thing that was interesting was a young team there that were... This is what I was originally going to comment on, the Livingston young team, but I'm not 100% sure what happened. They all left en masse, Now, I thought they'd been told to calm down by the stewards, didn't, and then eventually were chucked out by the head honchos were spoken to, the ringleaders, and they didn't calm down, and then eventually were moved on by stewards and police. But I think it was one of them had kicked a fence and was going to get chucked out, so they all formed a circle round him to stop him, which is actually pretty cool. That's a fair degree of solidarity. But then I've heard there was like Edinburgh City, the ultras from Edinburgh City. They were there causing bother. I'm not 100% sure what happened. But there was a funny bit where I think they'd been accused of damaging seats. And there was, when they were all leaving the ground en masse, there was a Livingston fan that was sitting in the stand at Ainsley Park. He'd shouted at them and saying, you're costing the club money. And I think, geez, they must have actually smashed up that stand good and proper. When I was leaving, I had a look around. 2 seats. two damaged seats. Now, the funny thing is, most clubs, you think, well, can you swing £100 to fix the seats? Livingston, one of the clubs, so I think, I'm not sure if the budget can stretch to repair the stand at Ainsley Park.
That might just tip them over the edge. So this win has came at a cost. I did see the video of kind of quite young-looking ultras marching through streets of the Old Town in Edinburgh. Yeah,
that's pretty cool, man. And you see they're all dressed in black. They've all got Livingston scarves on. There's 2 guys with drums, and they do make a noise. And the drums, I don't mind the chance of drums, because I was quite close to the drums, just cut right through you. But it's good that it's like, and you want to see that. I mean, obviously, as long as it doesn't get into anything a bit untoward. And I do think there was one point in at half time where they ran round to, there's like houses that back onto Ainsley Park. I'm not sure if there was something going on there, but they ran round to that. And I know the Spartans Twitter account, it said, might look at getting some shares in dark clothing for feral youths industry. Clearly a market for it based on today's crowd. That was quite a typical Spartans Twitter account, a bit classist. A bit
feral youths is exactly the sort of stuff you would expect to hear from a Conservative councillor.
Exactly. Funnily enough, who runs the Spartans Twitter account. So yeah, that might account for that sort of stuff. I would say though, the high point from the game itself, I did bump into Liam Innes. I think he's been on some of the podcasts, when the Livingston specific podcast with Craig Fowler. You might not know the name, but you will know him through his work with Ouija's, the Amazon Prime comedy.
Yes. Now, I listened to that Livingston podcast on the first day of the season going up to Inverness, the one where Fowler sat down with him and with another Livingston fan and talked through it. Yes, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together and remember that he was involved in Ouija's, which I have yet to watch, but it is on my watch list based on your recommendations.
He played Barry's pal. He's in this scene. He's in 2 scenes at this party, and it was genuinely like, wow. So I turned around just to take a look out, and he was like standing. So I was talking to him for about 5 minutes, talking to him about football, and talking to him about his involvement in Ouija's, and I just. Remarkable stuff. It's like very briefly starstruck. Aye, it was good, man. It was good. No, it wasn't good because I can't remember it. Meeting Liam was good. The game itself, not fantastic. And I've kind of gone for a tangent. I can't say definitively what actually happened in that match with regards to the young team getting chucked out. But good when they make a noise, bad when they get involved with scrapping with the locals for Pilton. Nobody wants to see that. But Fraser, we'll talk about something spectacular, and this might have been pound for pound the biggest upset of the weekend, because Alloa Athletic went to Firhill. They beat Partick Thistle 3-1, and the definite winner from this fixture was the veteran attacker Kevin Cawley, who scored 2 very, very, very lovely goals.
He did, and these highlights, if you haven't watched them, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have watched them, let's be honest, but if you haven't watched them, these highlights are terrific viewing, because this looked like a really, really good game of football above all else between 2 very good teams. Alloa didn't look like they started well. They were maybe a wee bit fortunate only to be 1 goal behind at one stage in the game, but then it was like just something switched with them, and all of a sudden they were given it as good as they got, and there was a lot to like about this Alloa team. Stephen Buchanan's performance, particularly in the second half, it looked like he ran Harry Milne absolutely ragged.
Not many people will say that.
No, and that's somebody who before this season probably there wasn't a great deal known about, so he came through their youth system and then stepping up and making that real impression in the first team now, which is always quite nice to see, because it felt like round about the Project Brave time that you stopped getting youth players through your club, and now we're maybe starting to see things re-emerging just with the West of Scotland Development League and all that. Dumbarton have a couple coming through on the fringes of things, and you've got guys like that at Alloa who look like they could go on to be very, very decent first team players. So Stephen Buchanan's performance is excellent, but Kevin Cawley's 2 goals, just the first one, now both completely different, because one is a volley that he absolutely whacks and one is a header. And obviously everyone who's listening to this will know Kevin Cawley is not a big, physical, imposing guy who you would associate with headers. Lovely goal. And his second goal, it's just...
The second goal, actually, I watched it, I was like, oh, you make that noise. I'm sitting watching the goals last night on my laptop in preparation for this, and the first thing I did was I text you and said, that Kevin Cawley goal. Absolutely stunning goal, man.
I just shouted, yes, as he hit it. Like, just one of these ones where you just know it's going to go in from, like, he does exactly what you would do in your head if you are playing football in a dream. Because obviously I would not have the ability to score a goal like that. In a dream, the ball would drop something like that and I'd hit it and just in my head about, yes! No, from the moment it's left my boot, it's in. It is a wonderful goal. And it's been, I don't think you'll find a fan in lower league football who doesn't like Kevin Cawley, who doesn't admire Kevin Cawley, and who isn't a wee bit jealous he doesn't play for their team. We did have Kevin Cawley for a season. Everyone kind of forgets about that. During which time he used his arse to roll John McGinn and then scored from 25 yards against Hibs. So He's always got a kind of special place in my heart for that as well.
There will not be many people that can say that they got the better of John McGinn. I suppose for this one as well, I mean, it was a fairly strong Partick Thistle side that was out there. I mean, you mentioned the team they had. I actually think it was, I would need to check, but I would assume from the names that were in commentary there, it was largely the players that would play on a week-by-week basis for them. But yeah, the goals that they ended up losing, I mean, the equaliser, like from Cawley stooping to head home, it's always quite a bad goal to lose, that when it's such a small guy who's getting in front of the defender and able to nudge down to do that. The second goal, it's very fortunate the way that the ball breaks to him, but the way he sort of adjusts his body, as you mentioned, adjusts his body to get underneath it and kick it and finish it like that is really good. And the performance I found was most remarkable, and not for a good way, was Harry Milnes. We touched on him there. Like, he looked like he was really struggling in this game. Like, Buchanan gave him a really torrid time, and of course it's his foul. Fouls was clear as day, especially the angle of the camera. Feels like you're almost on top of it, pointing at the ball that's gone out of play, and then aghast that the referee hasn't given the goal kick. It's a foul a million years, every day in a million years. And then there's Scott Taggart that steps up in injury time to slot it away. So it's good start to the season for Alloa as well. This is something as well. They're keep on going. What's that? It's a win and 3 draws that they've had so far this campaign. Yeah, and it just feels generally that something quite good has been built there. So this is an Alloa team, bear in mind, that has lost Ethan Sutherland, that's lost Taylor Stephen, that's lost Bobby Wales, all of whom were phenomenal. But you take the front 3 out, 3 of your best players, 3 of the best players in League One last season, yet they've still started this year looking very, very capable. Like Luke Rankin obviously started the year on fire, if we're talking about youth team products. He started the season on fire. He maybe stole the headlines a wee bit from Buchanan, who's also came in and has also looked really, really decent, and in this game was absolutely outstanding. But I thought I'd have a wee look at Andy Graham's record overall, and that's now 9 defeats in 38 games. Paul Hartley. That's the opposite of Paul Hartley.
Reverse Hartley going on. And you look at Alloa and think, why can't they win League One? So that record, if they can add a couple of players on loan, and you listen to Andy Graham post-match, and I don't know if you've listened to it, you might have done because you love him as much as I do. Like, do you not feel like proud and excited about Alloa as soon as you finish listening to it? I love the way that he, like, I always enjoy listening to Andy Graham speak, and I actually think it's quite weird. You know the guy John Walker that does the tactics analysis, and he talks about Rhys McCabe a lot of the time, and you hear him talk about Rhys McCabe, you kind of roll your eyes and think change the record. I reckon there's people that must say that when we talk about Andy Graham. Like, that's, I've kind of come to that conclusion. If Andy Graham was to listen to this, he'd be like, those guys are weird. But just him talking to it, and just where he was being asked about like the Challenge Cup and just what it means to a team like Alloa, and it's when you hear him describing how it is, it's like outside of the top flight, it is a legitimate chance for teams to win something tangible and you know, something that adds a bit of glory to the season, and you can win a wee bit of prize money. I think it's £100,000 to the winner as well. It's something that is really important, and his players are up for it. Everyone should be up for it. And it's great, and it's we might be a bit cynical about it, but for him just to enjoy it, just like it's like every other game, that's quite credible. And also from Alloa's point of view, okay, you wouldn't have them maybe as favourites for it, but they're they are possibly the strongest part-time club in the country at the moment, certainly there or thereabouts, there's no reason why they can't win it, or certainly get to the final of it, because you'll have championship clubs who maybe don't take it that seriously. You've beaten Partick Thistle, you've beaten one of the strongest teams in the championship, so you'll maybe come up against a championship club who has got a relegation battle, and they'll think, right, we're not going to risk players. Or you'll come up against a championship club that has a promotion battle, think we're not going to risk players. If you're not playing them, you'll be playing someone in your own league, and you have to back yourself to beat a team in your own league. So from Alloa's point of view, it's got to be an exciting proposition. I don't think Dumbarton, for example, could get to the final. I don't think we have the squad depth to do it, and I think the focus is solely on avoiding relegation this season.
Yeah.
But if I was an Alloa fan, there's no reason why we can't.
Home to Arbroath in the next round.
It's winnable. Very winnable.
Very doable. Absolutely very doable. And I've said that if other than Gary Naismith, the manager who I really want to have success is Andy Graham. But we'll finish up this podcast with something a wee bit different. We've been talking about winners and losers, but can I give you a hero of the weekend? I've
been waiting for, an hour and a half for this.
My hero of the weekend is Edinburgh City centre-back Eden Lynch, who has given me my favourite moment of the season so far. So on the Sunday, I went to one, because I didn't have anything to do in the afternoon. I went to Queen's Park versus Edinburgh City at Lesser Hampden for a number of reasons. To go to Lesser Hampden, of course, it's a bit of a collector's item with Queen's Park moving back into the National Stadium very shortly. To see Edinburgh, because mostly Saturdays I'll be watching Stennismuir games. So this was a chance to see two teams. I'll obviously see Queen's Park on the television and go and see Edinburgh. But the primary motivation behind it was to go and see Eden Lynch. Now, last season, I sponsored Ross Meakin's jersey. I've done it for a couple of years now, sponsored a player's jersey, and sponsored Ross Meakin's jersey. One, because he's one of my favourite players, and two, it's just a good way for the club to earn an extra couple of quid. And I was thinking, I really need to get this jersey signed by all the players that starred for Stennismuir last year. Now, most of them are easy to get because most of them are all still there. And the ones I've got so far, Ross Meakin, when I finally got it, I had his signature, Brown Ferguson's signature, assistant manager, and Adam Brown's signature. And Adam Brown's a good one to get because he's just been moved on. But the two that I need who aren't at the club are, one's Eden Lynch and one's Jordan Kirkpatrick, who's is at Camelon. But I've got Eden Lynch's number. I got it during the night we were presented with the trophy. How on earth, I don't know. But I remember waking up the next day to a couple of WhatsApp messages exchanged and just thinking, how on earth? But texted him on the Saturday and said, listen, I'm going to be going to the Queen's Park Edinburgh game. At the end of the match, would you sign my jersey? And he's like, 100%. I'll come and sign it. So we'll come on and talk about the match in a wee bit. But just at the end, Michael Mackindo, all the players, the Edinburgh City fans in one of the corner, Mackindo they're all clapping down there, and I can see I'm standing at the front with this shirt in a bag, and I can see and I shout, Lynchy! And honestly, man, absolute beaming when the big man comes over to me. I mean, you'll obviously, he was 2 years at Dumbarton, so you'll have no doubt spoken to him. And he's such a lovely big guy. It was great seeing him because the last time I'd have seen him would have been the night that Stennismuir were handed the trophy. And I have in silver pen, I can show you. This won't be very good for any of the people who aren't listening to this on YouTube, but you can see it there. This scribble here. He said he signed it and he said, I'll even put last season's number on it. So there's Eden Lynch 18. And I'd loved to have sit and spoke to him for a wee bit. There was wee boys that were there, like, big man, can you get Dom Thomas to come over? Can you get Dom Thomas to come over and speak to us? He's like, aye, I'll do it. So I couldn't quite have a chat with him and catch up with him, but I came away from Lesser Hampden and I was holding the shirt. I was walking down the road. And I actually had the shirt out, just looking at the signature, watching him sign it. Honestly, I felt like an 8-year-old. And it's funny that football has this incredible spellbinding effect on you that these ordinary people, what's Eden Lynch, about 24, 25? I don't know what he does outside of football, but just this guy who did this incredible thing for Stennismuir signed the jersey, and I was just I was just, it was brilliant. Completely, it's made the season so far, and it'll be great to get the other players involved. I mean, like I say, they're all still involved at Stennismere, most of them, and they'll be easy enough to get. I could probably get them all sorted by the end of the month. And Kirkpatrick, I'd probably want to get his because he scored the goal for Stenny last season, although he didn't really have much of an influence on the pitch. But Lynch is someone who I perhaps was a bit dismissive of when he joined the club. I know that he didn't have a particularly successful, certainly in his second season, only played about 9 times. And I think he'd gone on trial at Clyde and wasn't picked up there. And then that was a Jim Duffy's Clyde. But he came to Stenny and he did us a really, really, really good turn. You know, scored the winner against Bonnyrigg. And he's a cult hero amongst the Stenny fans. So for him to have done that has made the season so far.
It is nice when it's just these ordinary people as well. So I just looked up because I remembered seeing when I googled his name when we signed him, or I can't think it was when we signed him, came up with like his kind of work profile. He is a graduate apprentice surveyor. So like, works in property. Just this ordinary guy Monday to Friday, but on a Tuesday and Thursday night, or whenever Edinburgh City train, and on a Saturday afternoon, he is a superhero.
Aye, so it really meant a lot to me. Really meant a lot to me. That team as well. I mean, like, and that's not to say that his signature is worth more than anyone else's that I'm going to get on it, but just you felt when the players left at the end of the season, he was the one I think that we were all a bit sorry to see go, because I think there was perhaps understanding he might not be quite good enough to play at League One. But for what he did, played a lot more than I think a lot of people anticipated, and did chip in with a really important goal, and just a lovely big guy as well. So he made the season so far. So delighted. And once this is all signed by the manager, John Kirkpatrick, the rest of the players out there, it'll go on the wall that you can see behind you. This is a cardboard box that's going to go, and that's going to go up there in the box room in the flat.
That was fantastic. I've got, when we won the playoffs in 2011-12, so I was 13, I think, when we won them.
So you beat Airdrie?
Yes, the 6-2 game. So I had the SFL Iron Brew sleeve badges, and then number 9 on the back of my top for Brian Prunty. And when we won the league, we won the playoffs, and we all went back to stadium after that, Brian Prunty took my top and basically took me round all the players and got it signed by basically everyone. So that's framed on my bedroom.
Amazing, man.
At my mum and dad's, so that's framed on the wall. To be honest, I want it here as well.
I've heard that about Brian Prunty, isn't he? He's supposed to be just a lovely guy. I've never heard a bad word said about him.
Oh, just a brilliant guy. Like, he added me as a friend on Facebook purely on the basis of like the amount of fanboying I think I'd done over him, and I was just absolutely and completely starstruck by that. And I think we're still pals on Facebook, and I interviewed him a few times, especially over lockdown when we needed stuff to fill up the paper. And like, he's just one of these guys who can never be helpful enough to you. And I think someone who really appreciates what it means to be a lower league footballer. I think he is obviously a boyhood Airdrie fan, so he gets that kind of side of it, that, yeah, it would be very easy for us to support Rangers or Celtic or Man City or Man United, but like, there we are travelling to Peterhead on a Tuesday night, or travelling to, Stranraer on a Saturday afternoon to see our team get beaten 3-1, and he appreciates that, and it means a lot to him. So, yeah, great guy.
Yeah, it's brilliant, man. I remember there was being asked about like doing Pelly podcasts, and somebody asked about would you do more of them again? And like, time's a bit of a factor. I'd love to do more of them, but one of them was time was a factor. You could always find time, actually, to be honest with you. But the other one was like, when I was doing them in like 2015, 2018, 2019, I was a bit younger then, and so these were players that I remember like watching and being like, not idolising is the wrong word, but like really like respect and really enjoy watching them. And the older you get, you perhaps become a bit detached from that. But just like seeing Eden Lynch on Sunday there, and him coming up to me and doing the big stuff, it's just brilliant, man. Just absolutely brilliant. Sorry, I'm absolutely buzzing with that. Did you get a chance to see the highlights from Queen's Park versus Edinburgh?
I did, and I know that we were going to talk about Mark Weir as being one of the big winners in this game. My goodness.
Oh, he's excellent.
He is good at one-on-ones. Like, he really uses that big frame to come out and just, he comes out at like a real pace for such a big guy. I think players maybe expect, right, I'll be able to take a touch and then I'll go for goal. They get the ball at their feet. I'm like, shit, this guy's like coming flying. I don't know what weight Mark Weir is, but he's one of the heaviest players I would imagine in lower league Scottish football. And he's hurtling towards you, and it's almost like, oh, I better just hit this quickly. The one in the first half, I think it's from Dom Thomas, if I'm remembering correctly, where he comes out, he saves it with his feet, and Dom Thomas does take it quite quickly. Just a brilliant save. He's such a strange goalkeeper because he looked really bad at Bonnyrigg, and then he decanted Blair Curry last season for Stirling Albion, and I think he did okay for them. He certainly didn't look out of place when we relegated them in the playoffs. But he didn't look out of place there, and he's gone to Edinburgh, and I think there's been a few games where he's been a bit iffy, but in this game he looks superb. And I wonder if he's one of these goalkeepers who is at his best when he's busy.
I think so. I think there was a save that he made. Sean and I talked about it against Bonnyrigg. It was like, I think we described it as like David Seaman against Paul Pescalito for Arsenal against Sheffield United in the FA Cup. I mean, to say like that, the saves in this were excellent. He was Edinburgh's best player, but watching back the highlights made Queen's Park look better than they actually were. I actually thought Queen's Park were the better side, and they deserved the win. But Edinburgh had the chances. Edinburgh had some chances. I actually it's not to give them like a pat on the head and say, oh, well done you for trying hard. Edinburgh looked quite tasty in this game. I'll say that about them. There are a couple of guys in that team who I was really impressed with. Mark Weir was the most obvious one because he was kept really busy, and some of the saves he made were fantastic. Like, saved a penalty for Josh Hines right at the end of the game. But they've got Connor Young, who was at Clyde last season. He looked busy. James Stokes, I think a striker that they'd taken from the University of Stirling, was really impressed by him. Really impressed by a lot of his running in the game as well. I mean, it's easy to say that runs aren't necessarily something. I mean, all strikers should be making them, but his were quite clever, and his were always looking to try and hang in the last shoulder to try and get in behind. He looked pretty good. And the boy as well, Sam Jones, who they took from Spartans, who's playing number 8, he was pretty handy as well. Queen's Park huffed and puffed in this game. The only time where Queen's Park actually looked quite good, yes, they had chances, but the only time they actually looked like there was a massive gulf between the sides was immediately after they scored. Quite a good goal from Jack Turner, sort of a bit of a snapshot from the edge of the area, kind of goes through a couple of people and kind of catches Weir off guard. But after that goal, they really stepped up, and you could see the pace and the speed they were moving the ball at. And Edinburgh were really finding it difficult to try and contain them. But after that sort of 6 or 7 minute spell, the match found its groove again. And Edinburgh really held their own there. And I think if it was a Queen's Park fan, you'd be like, well, that's us into the hat for the next round. That's fine. But if you're an Edinburgh fan, I think you'd be really chuffed with that, because they went into game with a couple of players who weren't available through injury. I think there'd been a wee illness, a couple of players out through illness. Quinn Mitchell had to go off early doors after hurting himself in a bad tackle. So they're a really small pool of players to work with, but they did themselves proud. They did tire towards the end, but based on that, they're probably going to take a couple of scuddings over the course of the season. But I don't want to say they're fine, but there's certainly, you'd be optimistic off the back of a performance like that, because there was a lot to like there. And I enjoyed watching them. I thought this was actually a really, the scoreline was only 1-0. I thought this was a really good game of football.
Do you think that we have all perhaps slightly underestimated Edinburgh? So we all looked at 10th place in League 2 and thought, that's Edinburgh. And they probably are still favourites for it. But I think, certainly in my mind, and looking at the players they brought in, and the fact, I mean, let's be brutally honest, I hadn't heard of a lot of them, which, that's not the sign of somebody not being a good player. But I was looking at it going, not really sure about that. Don't know who he is. Don't know who players he played. That's quite a big step up. You'd still have them for favourites for bottom, but they don't look like they're going to get cut adrift. And I maybe thought at the start of the season that, I think I described them in the podcast a couple of weeks ago as being like the buffer zone for clubs like Stranraer, for Bonnyrigg. But actually, they look quite capable. And you would imagine, especially being such a young team and such an inexperienced team at this level, they're only going to improve this season. They're not going to get any worse.
And I think that once we get towards the end of the loan window, so we've got about another 2 weeks, till 2 and a bit weeks till that shuts, you imagine that they'll be able to improve the team by bringing in some more loan players to beef up the numbers. But yeah, I'm not going to say I think they'll do fine. I was encouraged by that performance, is what I would say. And one of the other things, just finally, because this podcast has been going on a fair bit, it always seems to happen when you and I get together. You're worse than Sean, actually, in this regard.
At least I didn't leave you for horse racing, though.
That's fair. You would never do that. You would never leave me for a horse. The Queen's Park highlights, again, Queen's Park highlights are very, very good. They're really, really well produced. number of times the audio was muted on them, because I think the camera was quite close to the Edinburgh City dugout, and Michael McIndoe was having, I think it was on each other, Eden, fucking have a word with him, something like that, talking to the boy I think it was, that he was playing centre back with. So all really interesting stuff. McIndoe was very audible throughout that match.
Don't bother muting them. Sean Davenport, if you're listening to this podcast, which I suspect you will be, don't bother muting the highlights. Like, that's what we want to hear. We want to hear the insights from the managers that you can hear perfectly at Lesser Hampden. I suppose it won't be an issue when they're back at Big Hampden. You won't hear a thing.
You won't hear a single thing there. Just the seagulls flying around the ground. One final thing before we finish. I met Dave before the match.
He's real.
He's real. He's a real guy. He's really sound. I was talking to him for about 5 minutes. I came into Leicester about 25 minutes before kickoff. And he sort of said, all right, I introduced, so I didn't introduce himself, but I knew who he was from the accent. So it was really good to catch up with him and just talking to him about like what it's like to work with Michael McIndoe. And he's like, he's asking, after they do interviews, like he was saying that McIndoe asked them for their thoughts on the game. You know, I think he's trying to have a real holistic approach as the entire team, not just the players, but the entire team at Edinburgh City are all driving forward. And I suppose in their situation, don't have a lot of money. A lot of people fancy them to go down. There will be a lot of like pulling together in that direction. So if you can even bring in the media guys to help you, then that might go some distance. Did
you drop Dave into various aspects of your conversation? Well, that's really interesting, Dave.
I didn't, but I did mention the Dave counter. That's when Michael McIndoe had pointed out, that's when I had to finish. That's when the Dave counter. But what a way to finish it with the man himself saying, Dave, loved it. Well, Fraser, I think that's quite a lot there. I mean, we did cover 10 games, to be fair. So that's you are getting your money's worth. You are getting your money's worth from us. Fraser, as we mentioned, we are going off to record a podcast talking about Dumbarton and how their season is kicked off and what the situation is at the Rock. If you do want to listen to that, you are going to have to subscribe, and it's as little as £2 per month, and there is content that goes up there all the time. You will not be disappointed. It really is. That is value for money. That is value for money. So please do get involved. But Fraser, a pleasure getting to hang out with you for the past, nearly 100 minutes.
Yes, likewise. And now we can do it all again for another God knows how many minutes talking about Dumbarton. Fantastic.
Now I'm giving you half an hour, and if you go over that, I'm just going to cut out and tell fella, just you record an outro for that. But please, if you are going to game it this weekend, please do enjoy your football, and much in the same way as Liam Callaghan's non-celebration after scoring against Montrose, do so respectfully. Thank you. Take care.